Well, to discuss that further, we're now joined with Mr. E. Michael Jones, who is the editor of Culture Wars online magazine, and he's joining us live now via Skype from Indiana. Mr. Jones, this fight against terrorism in Iraq and Syria continues with liberations continuing in both countries. How do you feel about where this stands right now?
Well, I think what you're seeing is the trajectory of a failed insurrection. It began as a guerrilla war. At a certain point, they had enough material to wage conventional war, and now I think that conventional war has failed. It has failed. And so what I think you're going to see here is that the forces are going to disappear back into the population, back into where they were when it was a guerrilla war 4 years ago. And I think that what we're going to see here is that the front on the war is now going to be moved into Europe. I think what you saw in Belgium was the counterattack against the West by these Daesh, ISIS forces. I think you're also going to see basically the Europeans trying to buy off the Turks at this point. They've offered the Turks $6 billion to keep the refugees in Turkey, to keep them from crossing the Aegean. And now it looks as if Greece is trying to broker a similar type of deal. In other words, to cut off the refugee flow. But I think this is where the front is going to move now that the military offensive is failing.
Mr. Jones, when you read in the Western media, both armies, be it the Syrian or Iraqi army, and those helping them, be it the Russians or the popular forces, they're seen as the villains here. They're quite strongly criticized, even though they're the ones who are successfully fighting these terrorists. Why is that, do you think?
Well, because the United States backed these people and wanted to overthrow Assad. And now it clearly has failed. That offensive has failed. And so the United States is going to have to find Plan B, or go to Plan B, which I've heard is going to be the breakup of Syria into a balkanization into ethnic states. But that doesn't change the fact that according to the U.S. media, the Russians are still the Russians are the villains in this scenario.
Indeed, and when we look at Iraq, obviously, the liberation of Mosul would be a big win for the Iraqis, obviously. But even when it comes to that, the popular forces are quite strongly criticized, even though they're the ones who are on the front line. And many people say that the U.S. has a role which actually helps the terrorists again in Iraq. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, well, they did. I mean, basically, the ISIS was created first of all, by the bungling of Paul Bremer, when he basically de-Baathified the entire Iraqi army and created a guerrilla insurgency. That guerrilla insurgency then gained power and became a conventional army. And at this point, the United States had to, if they wanted to win, they had to put a no-fly zone over Syria. They didn't do it. They backed away. Russia entered, and now the conventional war is lost. But that doesn't change the fact that this is part of the big orchestrated attempt to rein in Asia by basically breaking Russia. The simultaneous war, economic war going on here at the same time was the oil price war, where they got the Saudis to pump more oil to try and bankrupt Russia by driving down oil prices. So this is one front on that big war against Russia over who's going to control Asia, and that hasn't changed.
Okay, we'll leave it there at that point. But as always, Mr. Jones, we of course appreciate your insight. That was E. Michael Jones, who was speaking to us live from Indiana.